My husband is a college professor. One day, when I wanted to ask for a divorce, inexplicably, he stuffed me under his desk. As his student came in to ask him questions, his hand was feeling my head under the desk. Deciding to divorce Jack was a result of careful consideration. Firstly, our marriage was a farce from the beginning. Secondly, his heart was never truly mine. So, I went to his office to find him, and he pressed my head under the desk. Just as I was about to speak, a student walked in. Teacher, the voice sounded like that of a girl. From my perspective, I couldn't see anything, but the touch of his hand pressing on my head felt very real. I heard the soft voice of the girl asking if she could pass the final exam. Up to this point, everything seemed normal. But then the girl suddenly added in a whisper, "Jack, I'm willing to do anything as long as I can pass." In the quiet office, with only the teacher and student present, I felt like a third wheel, squatting under his desk. His hand was still on my head. I heard him ask, "Really, anything?" The girl trembled and hesitantly answered with a soft yes. Then, Jack, in his usual calm tone, asked, "Can you prepare well for the retake next semester?" I must say, Jack truly lived up to his title as the devil to his students. Because even I, hidden under the desk, could hear the girls sobbing. After the girl left, I finally emerged from under the desk. "Why did you stuff me under the desk?" I questioned him. Leaning back in his chair, he smiled. Jack loved to smile, but I knew most of the time, his smiles were fake. In fact, he wasn't particularly easy to get along with. "Anna, repeat what you just told me." He lightly tapped on the table. "Why did you stuff me under the desk? And one more thing. I want a divorce, Jack." His tapping fingers paused, and he looked directly at me. "Don't even think about it, Anna." I didn't understand. If he didn't like me, why was he so adamant about not getting a divorce? So, I took out the printed divorce agreement I had prepared, laying it out on the table for him to see. "Jack, take a look. If we divorce, we have 2 sets of properties, one for you and one for me. The car is yours, so it goes to you. We don't have children, so there's no need to discuss custody issues, along with some personal assets." Jack's slender fingers picked up the divorce agreement and effortlessly fed it into the nearby shredder. I swallowed the curse that was about to come out of my mouth. Because suddenly, I remembered how Jack had taught me not to curse, using less conventional methods. "This is poorly written, rewrite it." He leaned back. "Do you think I'm grading your paper? Besides, you're no longer my student, Jack." Yes, you're my wife." He never listened, standing up to tidy up his teaching materials. And as he did, he leaned down to kiss my lips. "I have a meeting tonight. If you can't wait for me, just go home first. We'll talk about the divorce when I get back in the evening." Of course, I couldn't wait for Jack. Their seminars often ran for hours, and I wondered what they could possibly discuss. At 9 o'clock in the evening, he suddenly sent me a message. Just 2 words. "Check again." He was not fond of using electronic devices. His chat apps were usually inactive, and he could isolate himself from the world during holidays. Our last chat dated back 6 months to when he visited my new company, and I sent him my location. I was now 100% sure that his phone must have been stolen. Now it was some criminal group pretending to be him and chatting with me. The next step might be trying to scam me for my money. So, with a sneer, I replied in a man's tone, "Sorry, she's asleep," and tossed the phone aside, ignoring it. I had initially thought of warning Jack about his identity being potentially stolen. But then I realized, why bother when we were getting divorced? So, I covered myself with a blanket and went to sleep, eventually being awakened by the sound of keys turning the door locked. The bright light shining in my eyes woke me up. Jack had turned on all the lights in the house and was rummaging through things, looking for something. "Why are you back so early? What are you looking for?" I yawned, rubbing my head and looking at him. He squinted, standing in front of me with a strong smile, full of meaning. "Where did you hide it?" I hadn't seen him smile like this before, so meaningful. "Hide what?" "I have no idea what you're talking about," I said, bewildered. He took a deep breath and asked, each word emphasized, "A man." "The one who sent you a message on your phone, a man. Jack, are you serious? Are you really getting angry over this?" I began to speak, but he started unbuttoning his shirt. "Angry? I'm not angry," he clarified. Loosening his tie and tossing it on the bed, he continued, "I just think it's a shame. If there were two people, it might be more exciting. Wait, Jack, don't." I tried to stop him, but he stopped his fingertips just at my waist, chuckling lightly. Though he hadn't said anything, I instinctively shrank back. Damn, why did this feel like one of our tutoring sessions from the past? I finally couldn't hold back and threw a pillow between us. "You smell, Jack," I said. "Really?" He raised an eyebrow. He didn't actually smell, he didn't smoke or drink, he had only just attended a meeting that night. But still, I turned my face away and tried to mask my annoyance. "So, why don't you go take a shower?" Finally, the man was persuaded to go to the bathroom. I leaned against the door and took deep breaths. Damn it, I was still angry. Why did I fear him so much, as if his presence was engraved in my bones? He used to just be knocking on my door with his fingers, shouting, "Jack, I want a divorce." The sound of rushing water from the bathroom was loud, and I thought he wouldn't be able to hear me. Even if he could, there was a high chance he wouldn't rush out to scold me. But after all these years, I realized I had underestimated Jack. He yanked the bathroom door open, and I couldn't process what was happening. The mist in the bathroom was particularly thick. He grabbed my wrist and pulled me into his arms. I was wearing slippers and, at the last moment, defiantly kicked them off to avoid stepping on the wet floor. Then, Jack kissed me, engulfed in the mist of the bathroom. I stood barefoot on the tiled floor. After kissing me for a while, he lifted me up and placed me on the sink. His hand rested at my side. "Anna, can you take back everything you said this afternoon?" Jack's tenderness was something ingrained in me. His request meant his gentleness would now prevent him from expressing his anger. But from my years of experience being around him, it didn't mean he wouldn't get angry. In fact, he could be even more tormenting than expressing anger. So, I cowered. I shrunk back, but with the sink behind me, there was a recess there, causing me to lose my balance. I was about to fall, but he reached out and steadied me. "What are you hiding?" He raised an eyebrow. "Jack, we can discuss the divorce later." "Just wait, don't," I said, pressing my hand against his chest. The embarrassing sound of my heartbeat was burning me. Yet, he showed no mercy, saying simply, "It's too late." He was like a wild beast, toying with his prey, and I was nothing more than a meal on his plate. His gaze always stirred up unpleasant memories in me, aimed at triggering certain emotions. Suddenly, a loud vibration erupted, interrupting our moment. It was Jack's phone on the sink, ringing. Normally he would have ignored it, but this time, he glanced at the screen and answered the call. Although I didn't intend to eavesdrop on what was said on the other end of the line, the cries of a woman still reached my ears. With bitter realization, I noticed that Jack's voice softened, and then he looked at me and slowly released me from his grasp. Using his lips to tell me he needed to step out for a while, I sat on the sofa at home, molding the teddy bear pillow that Jack and I had won together into various shapes. Suddenly, I stood up and changed my clothes, feeling increasingly enraged. I needed to find out the truth today. Who was the woman Jack frequently called? For what felt like some time now, he had been coming home late from work, and I had endured it. After all, he didn't willingly get into a relationship with me initially. But why was he so good to me, making me believe he actually loved me? Therefore, receiving a call from a woman and rushing out urgently heightened my suspicions of infidelity. He knew I liked him, but why then was he off to see another woman? I raced downstairs and coincidentally saw Jack's car pulling out of the garage. He was driving quite fast, and I thought I would never catch up with him this time. Fortunately, there was a taxi that happened to drive up from my left. The driver, upon hearing that I suspected infidelity, maneuvered the vehicle with such speed and skill that I wondered if he had been a retired race car driver for years. Regardless, whether or not my mission to catch Jack in the act would be successful, I wasn't sure. But the driver managed to make me nearly vomit when it was time for me to get off. Jack's destination was the hospital. Only the emergency center was open at such a late hour. I don't know why I followed him like a thief. Regardless, he walked with a purpose, not hesitating at all. I followed him, and despite his winding route, thankfully, I didn't lose sight of him. I had never expected that following him would lead me to the nighttime pediatric clinic. This is perhaps the busiest area in the whole hospital. Even at 1 or 2 in the morning the lights were still on. There were children crying, adults rushing around. I hid behind a pillar in the waiting room, secretly observing Jack. He was tall, hands in his pockets, standing there in a noticeable way. As he walked towards the row of chairs in the waiting hall, he stopped in his tracks. Then I heard a young boy shouting out to him through the crowd, "Dad, how did I know it was him being called?" Because that little boy ran over and threw himself at Jack. I couldn't bring myself to think about how I felt when I saw that scene. My mind went blank for a long time. I never imagined that Jack was hiding this from me. He had a child and never told me. We were married, and he had a child outside. What does this all mean? I couldn't understand any of the scenes unfolding before me at that moment. I thought I would be hysterical. I thought I would confront him, but I just felt powerless. A part of my heart slowly cooled down, that's all. I always felt this way, agitated, uneasy, never able to approach in moments like these. How should I question him? From what standpoint? Ridiculous, his wife? I stared blankly at a woman walking towards him from behind. He was talking to her with his head down. I didn't know that woman. I had never seen her before. The woman squatted down and patted the boy's head, then pulled him up. Jack's hands were still in his pockets. The hospital's overhead lights were generally cold white. He lowered his head and spoke to the woman. As they talked, the woman suddenly burst into tears. Then the next second, she went forward and hugged him tightly. Jack's body visibly stiffened, perhaps wanting to pat the woman's back. But in the end, he didn't raise his hand. I couldn't watch anymore. I silently left the hospital alone. It seemed like the city only had the hospital entrance. No matter what time it was, there were always people coming and going, the lights reflecting the crisscrossing traffic lights on the road. The 24-hour convenience store was still open. You could get a latte and a sandwich for 15 yuan. I sat in the store, trying my best not to think about it anymore. That boy, rushing over and calling him Dad. The little boy looked about 5 or 6 years old, but we had only been married for 3 years. Before that, I had never heard of this woman. I had liked Jack for a long time. He was my mom's star pupil. In high school he tutored me. My previous tutor was particularly strict with me, making me write lines for every mistake in ancient texts, sometimes even resorting to physical punishment. My mom, feeling sorry for me, got me a new tutor. At that time, Jack was still in college, and the first time he saw me, he smiled at me. I thought I finally had a kind teacher. Jack's lectures were indeed gentle. He explained topics clearly and gave manageable assignments. Most of the time I could keep up with his pace. But if I couldn't keep up with him, he would use a gentle tone to say some chilling things. One time I was sick, had a terrible headache, but luckily no fever, and it was during the intense period of our high school exams. My mom still had Jack tutor me. I remember clearly, that day, I got many questions wrong. I looked up at Jack and told him I couldn't go on. He said, "All right, don't do it." A hallucination appeared in my mind. I thought he had a halo and angel wings behind him. Then he told me that the tasks for that day had to be completed next time, and to do double the amount. So the halo turned into horns, and the angel wings turned into demonic wings. That day, I cried while finishing the exercises. He watched me cry with his chin in his hand. That was when I realized Jack just appeared to be kind to everyone, but in truth, he had a cold heart. He could smile at anyone, but could also cut anyone down. I downed the latte in one go, burped. The phone had been ringing non-stop. Jack probably went home and found me gone. He probably didn't know what I had seen. The phone kept ringing. I sighed, and finally picked up. "Where are you?" His voice came through the receiver, patient and gentle as always. I took a deep breath and told him, word by word. "I'm at another man's, in bed." There was silence on the other end for a while. Then I heard his voice, still gentle, trying to soothe me. "Which man?" I took a deep breath. I couldn't stand the way he was speaking. His indifferent attitude, every compromise he made me want to cry. "What does it matter which man? I want a divorce from you, Jack." I yelled out these words, startling the store clerk, who then buried his head back into the cash register. Car horns blared outside, the city engulfed in hazy lights and shadows. Why was I still feeling sad in this kind of situation? Jack's goodness wasn't just for me. Wasn't that something I already knew early on, returning home? As I inserted the key into the lock, the door opened. I saw a slightly panicked look in Jack's eyes as he looked at me. Honestly, I had never seen him like that before. He was dressed neatly, and as he saw me, he pulled me into his arms. "Anna, what's wrong?" He still smelled faintly of hospital disinfectant. Was that the same way he held that woman earlier? I pushed him away suddenly. I saw everything. You went to the hospital for that woman and her child, didn't you? I tried to find something in his eyes, foolishly hoping for something. But all I caught was a moment of panic in his eyes. Then it returned to a soothing calm. Anna, are you mistaken? Give me an explanation, admit it outright, but why lie? Why tell such an obvious lie? I shook my head, stepping back. How many times have you deceived me, Jack? How many lies have you told me, or rather, is there anything that is true in the end? In fact, when I thought about it, he had never even said he loved me in person. I vividly remember the day Jack proposed to me. It was the summer after my senior year. My mom was critically ill. I barely caught the last train home. The stark white hospital room felt like a raging dream. My mom, a teacher, had spent her whole life speaking on stages, but she was always worried about me. Always wanting to give me the best. When I was young, with her meager salary, I asked for a very fancy and expensive hair clip. She bought it for me without blinking an eye. Later, I learned she used her meal money for it, so those few weeks, she didn't have a proper lunch. She always told everyone how good her daughter was, but I wasn't always good. I was rebellious. We also had arguments. I ran away from home and slept at a friend's place. She spent a whole night searching for me in the dark. I always thought she would never grow old. I always thought she would always smile at me. But one day, she couldn't get up anymore. There were needle marks all over her hands. Then she moved to a different type of medication and would often complain about feeling uneasy. Jack and I being together was somewhat arranged by my mom. How much did Jack like me? I didn't know. But he respected my mom a lot. After all, she helped pay for his college tuition. I liked Jack. He was the man who filled my youth, my teenage infatuation. But Jack always appeared to be in control. He was gentle and restrained, except in bed. In reality, when doing certain things, if he showed emotions I should have long understood, he wasn't a gentle person at heart. That day, I stood outside my mom's operating room. The hospital had issued a critical condition notice. Jack had brought some dumplings from outside, handed them to me. He was an assistant professor by then. His work kept him busy, but he never forgot to remind me to eat. I couldn't eat. I look at him, and for no reason, I started to choke up. He hugged me. I loved the scent of Jack on him. He didn't smoke, always smelled clean. At that moment, I would be proud to have him to myself. I thought I needed a few more years with him. Until he held my hand, slid the ring onto my ring finger. My mind went blank, but he whispered into my ear. Your mom would like to see us get married. Let's do it sooner. I returned to my old house. I had nowhere else to go. Packing my things was simple. Jack watched as I packed, and I found it hard to say anything to him, vaguely feeling that he was determined to protect that woman to the end. My mom had been gone for a while. The two of us had indeed argued in front of her. My mom always said a man like Jack was hard to come by. Now I couldn't agree more. Jack didn't agree to the divorce, so I was preparing to sue him. Before that, I needed to find evidence of his affair. And that woman. I must figure out who she really was. I was too far from the hospital that day. The woman's appearance was blurry in my mind. But if it was something important enough to go to the hospital for, it wouldn't just be a one-day visit. I staked out the pediatric section, initially planning to wait for a day or two, but eventually, I might have to hire a private detective to handle it. I hadn't expected to come across it on the first day. It seemed the young boy was sick. Crying, he was being led by his mother. The mother and son went into the specialist clinic, and after a while, they left to register and buy medicine. I had joined the detective society in college, and I got along really well with the president. Every day we were either helping the security guard find his cat, or providing some juicy gossip for the school newspaper. Thanks to that time, my surveillance skills had gotten better than an average person. But I couldn't have imagined that the woman's home was in the same residential complex where I lived. I confronted the woman directly. At this point, I didn't want to hide anything anymore, or maybe I was just too angry. After searching for so long, suspecting for so long, the person was actually so close to me? Jack probably visited her house quite often, right? The moment the woman saw me, she was startled. Her face turned extremely pale, and then she started to retreat continuously. It was obvious that she refused to communicate with me. She had a very delicate appearance, not particularly good looking. I thought that to capture Jack's attention, one would at least have more captivating features. "Don't come any closer," she said. The woman shook her head at me, which surprised me. Judging by the age of the child, she must have known Jack before me. But facing me, it seemed like she lacked confidence. "I just want to ask you a few questions." I took a deep breath, trying to calm the anger in my heart. But she kept shaking her head, until I pushed her to the edge of the stairs. She suddenly exclaimed loudly, "If you come any closer, I'll call Jack." So, this was where her confidence stemmed from. I raised an eyebrow. "Perfect. I also want to clarify things while both of you are here." So, I called Jack. He almost instantly picked up. "Anna." Still as sweet as always. I sneered and asked him, "Do you know who I am with right now?" Given Jack's intelligence, he probably instantly understood my intentions. There was silence on the other end for a while. Without waiting for his response, I continued, "I'm talking about the mother and child you secretly met at the hospital last time. Any guesses on what I might do to them?" Honestly, when I posed the question, I had imagined various responses from him. He had never been angry with me before, so I naturally thought he might just joke around and placate me. However, his tone immediately turned cold. "Anna, I'm warning you. Stay away from her." Jack had never been stern with me. I didn't know what he was like when he was angry. I didn't even think anger was an option in his life. So, I trembled as I held the phone. It seemed like he only realized the situation later, as he softened his voice. "Listen to me, don't meddle in this matter anymore." "What do you mean, don't meddle? You are my husband, what is there that I can't meddle in?" I was almost shaking with anger, but I didn't want to lose my composure in front of this woman holding a child. Jack seemed to be explaining something on the phone, but my mind was buzzing, and I couldn't focus on a single word he was saying. In the end, it all boiled down to him asking me not to disturb that mother and child duo. "What exactly is your relationship with Jack?" I directly hung up the phone and asked the woman in front of me. Just then, she suddenly pushed me hard. "Get lost. Who are you? Do I have any connection with you?" The woman's tone escalated suddenly, waving her arms. To be honest, I was taken aback by this scene. My mind went blank for a moment. "Don't come looking for me in the future. I don't know you." She pointed at me and shouted, a stark contrast to her previous meek demeanor. I wanted to grab her arm, but she shook me off. As neighbors peeked and probed, their inquisitive gazes oscillating between us, I took a deep breath and ultimately couldn't hold on to her like those female protagonists in cheating videos. I had the evidence of the conversation between the woman and Jack recorded after finding a convenience store closest to my home. Though I hadn't yet unraveled their relationship, the evidence seemed enough for me to file for divorce. Jack called me several times after that, but irritated, I simply blocked him. As the sun set, peeking through the glass window, people bustled around. It seemed like there would always be distressing matters in life. If only nothing had happened, Jack would still be my husband, and I would still be secretly keeping him. But who knows how many vile things the person who shows you tenderness has done behind your back? "Sister, do you know that lady with the child from earlier?" A young man suddenly sat next to me. He raised an eyebrow, appearing like a college student, just a bit too thin. "Why do you care about her?" His sudden appearance was odd, and frankly, I didn't want to relive what had just happened. So, I ignored him and walked out of the convenience store. As I stepped out and turned back, I noticed that the young man was still staring at me through the glass window. I felt a shiver down my spine. It seemed like I encountered strange people all day today. I had intended to hail a cab back. However, the usually bustling street now couldn't seem to find a single available taxi after trying over a dozen cars, all occupied. After waiting for over 20 minutes and feeling a bit hungry, I spotted a street vendor making pancakes and decided to walk over. Surprisingly, during the rush hour, there weren't many people around. I thought of just grabbing a pancake to curb my hunger. But seeing the vendor's pancake making skills, I understood why there were no customers. It was a mess. "No cilantro, please," I told the vendor. He seemed lost in thought and absent-mindedly acknowledged my request. Then he poured a heap of cilantro over the pancake. It was only after he realized his mistake that he used a big spatula to scrape off the cilantro. I thought to myself, "Big brother, the pancake base is already ruined." Annoyed, I grabbed the mess of a pancake from the embarrassed vendor and stood at the intersection, ready to cycle back if needed. The wind stirred the leaves swirling on the road. These days, you rarely see those bread delivery vans on the streets, and the one approaching me was something I had only seen during my childhood. Checking the license plate, indeed, it was quite an old vehicle. As I picked off the lettuce leaves dangling outside the pancake, I pondered the age of the vehicle. Then I suddenly noticed something. Was the car heading straight towards me without slowing down? It must have been just a few seconds. From hearing someone behind me shout to be careful, to being forcefully pushed away. I fell on the pavement, the rough asphalt grazing my skin, stinging painfully. Unable to get up in time, I could only turn my gaze towards the scene. I saw the pancake vendor, who had pushed me away, getting hit directly by the car. At that moment, I was thinking, how could a person be thrown up so high by the impact? I thought, why did the pancake vendor try to save me? As the pain returned, the noisy voices surrounding me echoed, and several taxis suddenly stopped on the street, with many people getting out of them. Some were smashing the car windows with baseball bats, some were forcing other cars to stop, and there was the sound of shattered glass on the ground, mixed with the shouts of the police. The police. My consciousness slowly returned as I staggered towards the vendor, who was injured. There was a pool of blood on the ground, and I shakily took out my phone from my pocket. Several times, my trembling fingers couldn't even press the buttons. I repeatedly and briefly described the location and situation to the operator on the line, realizing how noisy the surroundings were and how loud the background noise was. I couldn't get my thoughts straight, couldn't articulate my words properly, crawling over, feeling disoriented as I watched the blood spreading beneath the vendor's body. The operator kept asking me about the extent of the vendor's injuries and informed me that they had dispatched a vehicle. They asked me several times if the victim was still conscious. Clutching the phone, I suddenly found myself unable to speak. The pancake vendor, what pancake vendor? His wig had fallen off, the fake beard too. Realizing my hands were trembling, I placed them on him, shaking. Jack. Your pancakes were awful. But why are your eyes not opening? This was a drug raid. It was a large-scale operation aimed at dismantling a drug trafficking nest. Even Professor Jack, who taught criminal law, participated in it. As for why a university professor like Jack would be on the front line of such an operation, I sat on a chair outside the operating room. The light above my head had been on for I didn't know how long, and I didn't know how long I had been crying. Until a woman ran in frantically, the same woman who had an unclear relationship with Jack. She saw me, then knelt down suddenly, apologizing to me frantically, refusing to get up. She kept saying sorry to me over and over again. I only found out that the woman was Jack's childhood friend. Her husband was also Jack's childhood buddy. The woman's husband was an undercover drug detective, but one day during a mission, he was discovered. Do you know what Mike looked like when they found him back then? Those people didn't even let me see the body, afraid I'd be too scared. But I still went to see it, and in reality, not even a human shape could be found. His fingers were all gone, his eyeballs filled with steel needles, the body stitched together with no discernible parts, and they injected large amounts of drugs and stimulants into Mike's body. When she reached this part, the woman was trembling all along. What's even more frightening is that the nightmare, it's just the beginning. Afterward, all those related to Mike began to suffer retaliations one after another. The woman had a newborn baby sleeping in the hospital room when someone snuck in one night and injected drugs. Injected into the brain, the child was rescued from the brink of death, but the brain had suffered permanent damage. So, the child kept blurting dad and mom incoherently. Talking about her child, the woman couldn't stop crying. In the dimly lit corridor outside the operating room, the one incandescent light reflected on people's bodies. I didn't know how long I had been sitting. I didn't know what I should be contemplating. Just during those long hours, people coming and going in front of me, the wheeled-over patients, the weeping relatives. It was a mixture of turmoil and silence. Shouldn't you eat something? Until a strange voice sounded by my side. At first, I didn't realize he was calling me until he said my name. Anna. I turned around and was startled. Because this person was in the hospital, wearing a mask and sunglasses, covering his face completely. Do you think it's strange for me to wear this thing? The man shook his head apologetically, saying, I am a drug enforcement officer. We never know where the criminal gangs are hiding and watching us. He casually crossed his legs and started chatting with me. Actually, he was the one doing most of the talking while I listened. Is Jack out of the ICU yet? I know you are his wife, and I was responsible for protecting you. I looked up at him suddenly. He smiled. You didn't know, did you? Jack almost got revenge by drug dealers. I had never heard of such a thing. My comrade died in the line of duty a year ago. We were tracking that drug trafficking gang. The comrade who died was Jack's childhood friend, and Jack had helped us a lot, so don't blame him. He didn't tell you these things for your own good. It always seems to be like this. For my own good, everything is kept from me, just to keep me in the dark. I pinched the edge of my skirt, staring at the light flickering on the floor. Until the man next to me pulled out a photo from his pocket and handed it to me. Look, this is the person who crashed into you that day. The photo showed a man looking disinterestedly at the camera. I stared at it and suddenly realized he looked familiar. Then it clicked. It was the male college student with eyebrow piercings who approached me at the convenience store that day. He goes by the name Spider on the streets. Seems pretty harmless, right? The whole area depends on him for supply. Do you know why he rammed into you that day? Because of your connection with Mike's wife. It's strange, with sunlight outside the window. Yet, a cold sweat crept down my back. Anna, do you think Jack hid these things from you because he thinks you're not worthy of knowing? The man's voice suddenly became serious. He pushed up his sunglasses slightly, revealing his eyes as he stared at me intently. No, he just wants to make sure that if one day you fall into the hands of the drug dealers, you can die a little easier. Because ignorance is bliss. Once you know something, those people will stop at nothing to make you talk. If you know nothing, you can escape their tortures. That's all. The man stood up and adjusted his clothes, then spoke his final words to me with a slightly less serious tone. Jack disguised himself as various people around you those days, just in case you were targeted by the drug dealers. He is protecting you in his own way, so you're not that unlucky. Anna. Jack was transferred from the ICU to a regular ward a week later. When he woke up, his consciousness was relatively intact, and people started visiting him one after another. He was popular, I knew. But sometimes it got a bit exaggerated. There were even fruit baskets left outside the door. I cooked for him at home every day and brought it to him afterward. These days, I haven't said a word to him. I feel like I should see a therapist, as I can't seem to speak when I'm around him. But he acts as if everything is normal, always smiling at me. He talks a lot to me, asking questions, and when I don't respond, he doesn't seem awkward. His leg was fractured, with 2 steel pins inserted. He had to undergo rehabilitation in a few days, and usually, I would leave after delivering his dinner. But that day, for some reason, I didn't leave. I wandered around the hospital yard in that area. The sun was sinking below the horizon, and the city's light faded into darkness. The evening was deep, and the wind stirred up unknown flowers. I sat there for a long time. Humans are strange creatures, full of entanglements, confusion, and always unable to be straightforward. They always care and measure, then become disappointed and anxious repeatedly. Around 9 in the evening, I returned to Jack's ward. He was probably asleep as the lights in the ward were off. The windows were open, and the wind rustled the curtains, casting shadows. I thought, maybe everything would have been smoother without me. The drug bust operation would have gone smoothly. Jack wouldn't have been hit by a car because of me. No one would have argued and talked about divorce with him every day, and he wouldn't have had to worry so much. Suddenly, someone embraced me. It was Jack, and there was a smell of antiseptic on his shoulder. I stood there, embraced by him, watching the swaying shadows outside the window. I felt like crying, wanting to cry badly. I heard my breath, a hitch. And then my nose started to sting. His voice was a bit hoarse, echoing in the silent night. I'm sorry, Anna. I thought I could give you the happiness you wanted, but I didn't realize that wasn't what you wanted. I promise you, from now on, I won't hide anything from you. Can you forgive me once, Anna? The evening breeze gently blew, and the moonlight hid behind his messy hair. I always thought you would be happy. But you always seemed unhappy because of me, right? On the day Jack was discharged, the news of the drug enforcement team capturing a major drug trafficking syndicate made headlines. While cleaning the mailbox at home, I found a recent letter. It was from that woman. Hello, Anna. By the time you read this letter, I will have gone somewhere else. I thought about it and decided to tell you some things, as you probably misunderstood the relationship between Jack and me. Although Mike and I grew up with him, I always saw Jack as a little brother. I did attend your wedding but had to come secretly due to Mike's situation. I actually like you, mainly because Jack really likes you. Did you misunderstand our relationship when you saw me hugging Jack at the hospital that day? I have been under surveillance by those drug traffickers and can only pass messages to Jack in this way. Unfortunately, you caught us. Don't blame Jack for being tough on you that day. You were looking for me, and at that time, those bastards had targeted me. I rarely see Jack agitated. That day, he raised his voice to keep you away from me. We didn't keep things from you. It was just that the drug dealers were still at large, and we couldn't rest easy. I wish you well, truly. I thought if it wasn't for this mess, could we have been friends? But I have caused the deaths of several friends. So, I'm going to a place where nobody knows me. I hope you can be happy every day now that you've read this letter. I hope I can take away your bad luck, and I hope you and Jack live well for a long time. With warm wishes. I closed the letter. But at some point, it suddenly hit me. What does she mean by going to a place where nobody knows her? I went to find Jack and called him. We went to the police station together. Indeed, there was no trace of that mother and son. The last place they went missing was at a scenic spot on the outskirts of the city, where there was a high cliff. The waves crashed on the shore, the foam shattered like a mirage. In the end, beyond the reach of the waves, a pair of women's shoes were found. The woman's name was Nancy. In her farewell letter, she mentioned that her husband loved that sea very much. Whenever her husband had holidays, they would always go to that sea. She said that if they had children, they would take the child to see that sea together. But she only found her husband's limbs. Her child suffered the insane revenge of those people. Just because her husband's true identity was discovered by the drug dealers, those around her were ruthlessly dealt with, one after another. She knew it was all because of her. The drug dealers didn't want her to live well, they wanted her to suffer, to be tormented. She said she had burdened many lives. She said she had caused too much harm. She wished to see the sea again with her husband and their child, believing it would be beautiful, undisturbed, far away from anyone. The woman was buried next to her husband's grave. On that rainy day, I shivered, and Jack took off his coat to give it to me. I moved aside. Urea patient, you should wear it. He said gently. Are you still mad at me? His tone was calm as he raised the umbrella over my head. No, I'm not mad. I whispered softly. It's just that lately, I've been thinking. I should have told you everything from the beginning. His voice was firm, speaking with seriousness. I should have taken you with me, at least you would have had someone to bury you. Nancy was not wrong, she deserved to live well. I watched the people dressed in black silently pay their respects at the tombstone, whispering softly. But Jack's words echoed in my ears. Give her a chance to make a new choice. Cowardice or evasion, forcefully depriving one of hope in life, no matter how pitifully others gaze, cannot save oneself. Later, I heard myself ask, what about the child? What about the child? The child was taken to a safe place. I hope he can have a peaceful and long life. Jack's voice sounded distant yet close. The night wind moistened by the rain, the trees rustled in the forest. The dark clouds covered the moonlight, and the mist washed over the inscriptions on the gravestone. As the end of the year approached, my social engagements increased. During this period, Jack had more free time. It was his turn to pick me up for the gatherings, although he always reminded me not to drink too much as certain uncontrollable factors meant I ended up getting quite drunk. As usual, my colleagues and I walked out to the hotel lobby after the gathering. Outside, the autumn night wind would sneak into the collars of people. Jack used to arrive early, but today he seemed unusually slow. My colleagues were waiting for a taxi, and we chatted about trivial things. Your husband is so good, always coming to pick you up. Among all of us married colleagues, it's only you and I who envy each other the most. I pursed my lips, pulling my neck into the scarf, feeling like the road ahead was swaying, with colorful lights all around. Yes, he's good, everything about him is good. Except that he doesn't love me, right? He's a jerk, you know? You can't tell at all that he's a jerk, but he definitely is. What did he do to me yesterday? I kept trying to think how he tortured me last night, but couldn't find the right words. But at this moment, my colleague had stopped talking to me. I squinted to figure out who the figure in front of me was, until it finally dawned on me. Jack. He came to pick me up. Are you cold? He reached out and touched my face, and I flinched. His smile tickled. I couldn't stand his smile, so I shook off his hand, and he followed closely behind me. I want a divorce, Jack. The car's heater was on high, and I felt a bit bolder. He sat in the driver's seat, and the vibrant colors of the traffic lights scattered in my eyes, chaotic and dazzling. Okay, the office is closed at night. I thought about it, and it seemed so odd at that moment. I suddenly noticed something on the seat next to me. A square box with a beautifully tied bow on top. I asked Jack what it was. A cake. He turned the steering wheel slightly, and I slid the box to the left with me. A cake? Whose birthday is it today? He didn't reply. I didn't feel like talking anymore. Leaning against the seat, watching the lights passing by outside the window like flowing streams. Until the car pulled into the garage. The engine turned off, and the roof light flickered for a moment. He turned to look at me, his eyes deep. It's not a birthday, it's our 4th wedding anniversary. As soon as we got home, he pinned me against the door in the hallway. I was still holding the cake in my hand, feeling dizzy, not reacting much before he kissed me from the corner of my lips, down my neck. Jack. I called his name, and he paused. Looking down at me, with eyes like a restless sea. You bought the cake, aren't you going to eat it? You can eat with me. I felt a bit unsure, realizing I had forgotten our anniversary. But the man took the cake from my hand, then stuck 4 candles on it. He lit a lighter, casting a dim light that barely illuminated the room, quickly extinguishing. I froze, pushed onto the couch by him. In the darkness, there was something delicately wrapping around my wrists, his knuckles poking me slightly at times, causing discomfort, then tied my hands behind my back. I don't love you? I heard his voice, ringing in my ear. The ribbons on my wrists gradually tightened. What else do I need to do to prove I love you? It turns out he heard what I just said. Does liking to the point of madness count? Unable to control myself, does that count? Wherever his hand passed, no matter how long ago it was, no matter how many times it happened, I seemed to tremble. You were so young then, how could I tell you? He seemed a bit angry. Saying that back then would make me feel like a pervert. His voice was hoarse, and I was a little afraid of this version of him. But my hands were tied. I know, but Jack, you're really good at lying. I'm afraid you'll deceive me again. I rambled on, but as I spoke, I started crying first. Whether it was to protect me or for my sake, the starting point was still to protect me. But I don't want to be deceived again. I'm afraid you'll lose me again. He was silent for a while, then bowed his head to kiss away my tears. I'm sorry, Anna. I'm also afraid of losing you. I'm afraid that if I tell you the truth, you'll leave me. Knowing my involvement with those drug dealers, leaving you would be the best option. But I don't want to leave you. That was the first time Jack showed his vulnerability in front of me. It was also the first time I encountered his selfishness. Truly shameless, with such unreasonable reasons. The cake on the table wasn't eaten, but it was consumed in a different way later. A bit messy, a bit rushed. In reality, no one is ever perfect, not Jack, not me. I reached out, encircling his neck. Sometimes his hair pricked, sometimes it was soft. He leaned in close to my ear, saying he loved me. Thank you. It seemed as if today, I had grown tired of hearing love me for the next 10 years or so. Jack tutored Anna for about 2 years. At that time, Anna was a high school senior, a young girl with rosy lips and sparkling eyes, looking helpless with a pair of watery eyes whenever she couldn't solve a problem. Deep down, Jack thought she was silly. But every time she asked for help, he couldn't help but soften. Once, he was in his university dorm, with an exam paper spread out on his legs, looking at the questions. Anna called him, asking for help with a question. The little girl probably didn't do well on the test, her voice sounding somewhat teary. She asked the questions, stumbling over her words. He just couldn't resist it. Couldn't resist it. In that moment, there was something, and then, his roommate who happened to come down from the upper bunk saw the scene. Thought. Jack is really terrifying. He didn't even feel anything when the school's beauty queen seduced him. How could he focus on math problems? Getting top scores in the department?